It's Mercedes versus Red Bull at the front of the grid for the Canadian Grand Prix, with the best McLaren Oscar Piastri in third place. And of course, John Noble, it had to be George Russell on pole position, Max Verstappen alongside him, the two protagonists from the big story in the last race in Spain.
Yeah, what's always quite amusing in Formula One is sometimes I think it's just Elon Musk who said this actually, the most amusing outcome is the most likely. And I think we've got that. We came here after Spain, George Russell and Max Verstappen had this incident. Max, admitted he was wrong beforehand. They bumped into each other at an airport a few days later, and the topic didn't come up. But it's back on the agenda now. Straight after qualifying today, Russell gets pole, talks about the race tomorrow, and so I've got a few more penalty points on my licence to play with, which is a bit of a nudge at Max, and I think he was made a bit of a response in the press conference, didn't he?
Yeah, he didn't look delighted when he came into the press conference, Max Verstappen. He wasn't furious or anything. I just remember seeing him and thinking, he doesn't look thrilled, but he was quite happy with second place. I suspect he did hear that little Russell comment, which was just as a jokey one, but George Russell knows what he's saying, doesn't he? So it was mentioned by Tom Clarkson, who hosts the press conferences, and basically Max said, it's childish and annoying, he doesn't want to talk about it, and he referred to it being talked about on Thursday. He said, you talked about it on Thursday. It wasn't entirely clear whether he meant George Russell talked about it, because Russell was asked about it and thought, he meant you in the media sense. I'm not sure, but it was very, very clear that Verstappen did not want to address this issue of racing with that risk of a penalty over his head, and he just said, it's just the world we're in today. And so he's giving that short shrift, and it came up later in the press conference as well. He just asked if he'd feel any different because of that, and just said no, and just would not talk about it. So he was having none of that. But I think Russell was quite enjoying it, because it's all part of the mind games, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. That's part of the game in Formula One, is to annoy the opposition, stir things up. Because this plays into the people's heads when they're out on the racetrack tomorrow. And I think, you are Max Verstappen, you are one of the very best, potentially, of all time in Formula One, but you have 11 points on your licence. You cannot go into moves that are as risky as if you had 0 points on your licence, because you could do everything completely clean, be involved in an incident, you get 1 point and it's a race ban. And I think George will know this. I don't think he'll try and sucker him into doing anything, but there will be this dynamic tomorrow, especially because they're on a slightly different tyre offset strategy to everybody else, and that could be the key tomorrow in terms of how the new mediums behave against the old mediums.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because it's not that they're trying to goad Verstappen, but that there's a little bit of a potential weakness there, because he can't afford to take any risks. So you can afford to put your risk level up a little bit more, and that's just part of the psychological game. So I'm pretty sure Russell was probably listening to what Verstappen said, thinking, I've kind of got under his skin there. Max, for all we know, didn't really mind, and he just thought, this is a good way to stop them asking me about it. He'd been asked loads of times on Thursday, but it makes for a really interesting start of the race, because the Mercedes was quick. George Russell quite rightly pointed out, we're good when it's cooler. The race starts 2 hours earlier tomorrow than qualifying did today, so if the temperatures are a little bit higher, that can make life much harder for Mercedes, we know that. So a really, really interesting setup for the race, with Mercedes finding for the first time this season grid-topping form.
Yeah, the Mercedes is in much better shape here this weekend. They brought the new suspension back that they had at Imola. The problems with Imola was it was the weekend where their season kind of took a turn for the worse. The pace to the front dropped away, the degradation wasn't there, the team was quite confused about what was the cause. And when they went to Monaco, they thought, we can't take this new suspension, let's go back to what we know, and they got through Monaco, got through Spain. But I think as they've dug into it, from what I understand, they think Imola was more about the general setup, direction they went wasn't correct, and actually the new suspension is what's needed. It was unmodified when it came here, it's the same spec as Imola, they've not changed it. It's come on and they feel much better. And the fact that Kimi Antonelli also, he says he hasn't had the greatest of weekends, but he's qualified fourth. He's equally up there. He felt he could have done better if he hadn't had to do an extra lap in the Q2, but I think he's pretty happy with where he's at, and we've got a very interesting race on our hands tomorrow.
I think it's worth talking about as well George Russell's pole lap, which was a really, really good one. He said it was exhilarating, a mighty lap. He said he had goosebumps, which he's never had before. So, of course, he's on pole. Of course, he's happy. But this felt like a really, really special lap for him. So I think it was quite a performance from him.
Yeah, I think what's important is the Mercedes has been quick all weekend this weekend. There is the potential. And I think that there is still this weakness of some races where it's hot the tyre degradation is worse, but here is cool. It plays the strengths and perhaps exposes some of the McLaren weaknesses, because generally the McLaren is quicker in slow speed corners. It's been their strength all season. But here, although the corners are in theory slow, you're not in them for very long, and it's much more about braking performances and that confidence to have the brakes, ride the curbs, and that's the area where the McLaren is not so strong.
And of course, McLaren, 3rd for Piastri, 7th for Lando Norris. What's gone wrong there, and how does the suspension geometry change, the front suspension geometry change that's on Norris's car, play into that?
Yeah, there's two aspects here. First of all, generally the McLaren pace itself compared to the opposition. The team was clear when it came here that Mercedes would be good. The Mercedes has always been good here, slightly lower temperatures, so they always felt they'd be potentially behind as well. Then we've had this kind of split of strategies, the C6 and C5 again, as we saw in Imola, as we saw in Monaco. Different cars are kind of behaving differently with them. The C6 got a very narrow operating window. Probably don't quite understand why it's narrower than other tyres, but it can fall out very, very quickly. And some teams have just absolutely nailed the C5. The car feels better on it, the drivers can feel more confident on it. And that made the difference today. George Russell and Max using the C5. McLaren's using the C6. They wanted to keep some new mediums for tomorrow, which they think will be an advantage. Not everyone agrees with that. So that partly explains the Piastri situation. And I think from Lando's perspective, there's been progress in terms of his feel in the car. We know all season in Q3 he's struggled to get that mechanical confidence from the car. There's this numb feeling they get from the front axle. So some minor suspension geometry changes just to feel better, which the team says has been ticked off. But Andrea Sella said tonight he simply tried too hard in that final run in Q3. So maybe feeling a bit on the back foot, maybe feeling that those Mercedes medium runners were going to make a good advantage. Just pushed too hard, he brushed the wall, didn't get a tidy lap, and starts well down the order.
And of course, you just said Norris, marginally the stronger McLaren driver going into qualifying. Doesn't count for anything if you don't put the lap on the board. And yeah, just wanting to get that little bit of extra feel, that greater cueing from the front end of the car. I asked Oscar Piastri about it because he decided not to run that upgrade. It was available to him. And he said, well, it's not really an upgrade, and I've been happy with the feel of the car. So it's going to be interesting to follow that. Who has it, who doesn't, could they diverge for the rest of the season? Actually, Stella did say there's already been a few little suspension differences between the two to suit their desires. Now, should we talk about Ferrari and Charles Leclerc? He wasn't very happy, was he?
No, very, very, very annoyed. Obviously, he came into today, just hoping to get some laps in his belt. Yesterday, difficult. Friday, crashed in P1, damaged the chassis, was out for P2, so had to get all his running sorted. He says he didn't think it held him back that much in terms of, quite well prepared, quite confident, but annoyed by Isaac Hadjar. Basically, he got caught in the dirty air. And I spoke to Charles after session. He said, and here it's potentially worse. Dirty air is bad enough in Formula One, but with the walls at the side of the track, kind of increases the impact and the effect of dirty air. Had a bit of a sideways moment, and although he was, very angry on the radio afterwards, it calmed down a bit afterwards. He spoke to Isaac in the media pen as we were chatting to him. Just said what he said on the radio was perhaps slightly different to how he felt now. But just frustrated that he starts behind again, and this has been one of the Ferrari's problems all season. It doesn't qualify as high up as it needs to really kind of be in that fight for the win on Sunday.
Yeah, 8th on the grid for Charles Leclerc, 5th for teammate Lewis Hamilton. Hadjar may not have got any penalty or concern. He didn't do anything wrong for the Leclerc one, really. But he did get a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Sainz. That's as open and shut a case as you will ever see. But it wasn't Hadjar's fault because he'd been told Sainz wasn't on a push lap. That's why he was confounded. Just got the 3 places penalty on the grid. So it's a nicely set up grid. 3 different marks in the top 3, a few people out of position. I think it's going to be a good race tomorrow, so definitely one to watch, particularly when Russell and Verstappen head down to that first corner on the opening lap.